Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. We're going to have a brief history of lab design with Malcolm, Jay, and myself. You probably can tell I've kind of lost my voice, which Malcolm would say that's a good thing, so I'll just shut up mostly and let him talk. I'm Leslie Asher. I'm a Director of Science and Technology with HOK. Prior to that, I worked with Malcolm for 15 years. So Malcolm really mentored me and taught me really what it meant to be a laboratory designer. And he's a legend. Everybody last night was saying what a legend Malcolm is. So it's been a huge honor. Jay Bargman, I have worked with on multiple projects when he was with Vignoli Architects. Incredible designs. So you've got a very esteemed panel of these two guys here whose experience in laboratory design is epic, not just because of the amount of time and the type of projects, but the creativity involved and the ideas of putting big ideas into laboratories, pushing the envelope and not just doing the same thing over and over, but really seeing what they can do that's different and better to move the laboratory design along. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Malcolm. He's got some slides, and we're going to kind of just have a panel discussion talking about some of the projects and the history of laboratory design. To you, Malcolm.
So it's not quite true that I taught Leslie much of anything. I just got out of the way so that she could learn. And that's kind of been our company philosophy. Get people started and get out of their way and let them learn what laboratory planning is all about. And so we miss Leslie. I was thinking about what to talk about today, and I was thinking about the people that are younger than I am that might be here, and then I got to thinking about that for a moment, and that's probably everyone. I wanted to just talk about how laboratory planning became a discipline separate from architecture or separate from engineering. Prior to the late 60s, laboratory planning was done by casework vendors. When an architect got a new building, science building, the casework vendors would call them up and say, we'd be glad to help you plan your laboratory, and we'd be happy to supply these Kiwani part numbers for you. And laboratory planning got done in that manner. There were a lot of things that happened along the way in the late 60s and the early 70s that changed laboratory planning. And I'm only going to talk about 2 or 3 of them today, but there are many others that were later important. In this time period, the country had built a whole collection of laboratories in a hurry. We had World War II to deal with, we had the Korean War, we had the Cold War. All of these things caused us to build laboratories in a big hurry without much thinking about the people that occupy them or anything else. And if you've ever read some of the stories about Los Alamos, you'll know that the laboratory buildings were built, General Groves had them built in 90 days. And so they didn't give much thought to what the people were going to actually do there. Another thing that happened that was fun, and we tried to have a recording of it, but how many of you here remember the radio signal from Sputnik? So in 57, the Russians, in the height of the Cold War, launched the first ever satellite to circle the Earth, and it made a radio sound, and it beeped. And all over America, kids listened to it on their shortwave radios. And the country was terrified. So that triggered John Kennedy to make a speech and challenge, establishing NASA and challenging NASA to put a man on the moon in that decade. And so that generated another bunch of laboratories built in a hurry without too much thought. And so at that time period, the country built several big laboratory facilities, Bell Labs, Brookhaven, and the Richards Medical Research Laboratories at the University of Pennsylvania with the architect Lou Kahn. And at that time, these buildings were acclaimed architecturally, and they did have a very strong concept. Lou talked about served and serviced spaces, meaning the laboratories were the served spaces, and the service spaces were, in this case, a building where all the mechanical bits and pieces were and serving the laboratory. So he talked about that. The scientists were less impressed with the building because when Lou tried to talk to them, he said they were disorganized and didn't seem to have a common approach to things, and so he went on without them. So all of you that have worked in the lab business know that that's exactly a description of every client. Jonas saw it, hired Lou Kahn, and Jonas had visions of laboratories that were flexible and would be able to be reconfigured over time and would have a different approach to things. So they started out to design the Salk Institute, which is, of course, just down the street. And the city of San Diego contributed the land, the March of Dimes and others contributed money, and eventually they got this done. So the point of it is that they decided to interview the scientists. Of course, Jonas Salk insisted on that, and they spent a lot of time with the scientists, and two people, Earl Waltz and Uli Lindner, were part of that team, along with Jack McAllister, who was the supervising architect. And they spent a lot of time deciding on how to build a lab building, and as most of us think today, they did a damn good job. So that inspired Earl to open an office, Earl Waltz Associates, to do lab planning. And that really was the first lab planning firm that was separate from an architecture firm. There wasn't a division of an architecture firm. So I went on to work for them eventually, as did many other people. And eventually, 10 to 12 years later, when I started research facilities design, Jack McAllister was my mentor. And so we had a great time figuring out how to sell laboratory design services to universities and clients around the country. So the next thing that happened was molecular biology came along, and this changed everything. No longer did people want to bring animals into the laboratory. They brought tissue culture instead. They brought slides. They brought very small samples. And I distinctly remember getting an education there at Stanford, where we were working with HOK on a laboratory building for Shumway, who was trying to develop the left ventricle assist device. And one of the researchers said, we need to deal with vibration because we have to control vibration in this building now. And I said, well, okay, but tell me what that means. Because all of us were trying to figure out what molecular biology was going to mean to laboratories, including the researchers. They didn't know. And he said, well, look in this microscope and look at this slide. And I said, oh yeah, there's a little dot in there. He said, yeah, that's a cell, and I want to stick a needle in that cell and extract the nucleus. And it's helpful if the building doesn't shake. And I thought, good point. So we went on, to over time, as did other lab planners, architects and engineers, to develop criteria. And the other thing you need to remember is that at this time, none of the codes, except NFPA 101, none of the codes address laboratories, really. All of that information that's available to us today wasn't available at that time, and we were all trying to figure it out. So Hypertech was one of the first biotech firms in San Diego and is credited with generating a huge amount of what we see around us today, because they were real entrepreneurs, came out of UCSD, and we, at the time, worked with them to plan their first laboratories. And this was really helpful because they had to think about the big picture. They had to think about what molecular biology meant to a world that was previously pretty much biology. And in doing that, we were able to introduce the idea of separating the equipment areas from the lab so that we could control noise and heat. We've been having a hard time selling that idea, but now they had to rethink how they were working. And so we were able to get that done. So, this building from 1985 embodies a great many of the things we do today. For those of you again, probably everyone in the room. The reason these drawings are a little fuzzy looking is because they were drawn by hand. No computers, the fax machine hadn't come along yet, so all done by hand. Hybrid was very important for us and they to learn about how molecular biology was going to change things. Okay, so that building is walking distance from this room, or at least it was till a few years ago when it, I think, has been replaced by bigger buildings. But the labs don't look too much different than a lab might look today. This was C-frame casework that Earl promoted. And then our first exposure to first-hand exchange between industry and university research was this building 2 years later at the University of California, where they insisted that they wanted to have open laboratories, and prior to this, their labs had all been cellular. So that was a chance to take what we learned from industry, from Hybrid, start with it at UCSD. In spite of the comments by our previous speaker, you'll notice that we do have floor-to-ceiling glass in this building. Perhaps this might have been the first one. So, benchmarking. We realized partway through that we needed to start a system of keeping track of what we call critical ratios. Nowadays we call them metrics, so that we could apply them to the next job. Because people come and go, and even though we're a small firm, I asked my business director last week how many people have worked for RFD, and the number was 165. So people come and learn from us and go on to other places sometimes, but we want to keep the knowledge. And so we keep this database, and we can sort it by 25 or 30 different metric requests, and that allows us to plan the next building, and that, of course, has become extremely important right now, and perhaps the panel will talk about it later, but now when many biotech firms don't want to own their facilities, but instead lease them, it's pretty hard for the speculative lab building owners to know how much of each kind of space to build. And so we and others have built the information to tell them what they need to know when they get started. So informed decision making, and we can track things over time. For instance, we can tell you in 5-year increments how much bench space as a percentage of the total lab space has gone down in comparison to the other spaces. I don't think we're building less lab space, lab bench space, but the proportions are different than years ago. So we track those things and try to use them for the next project. So I just wanted to finish by taking a look at 3 projects where we did that. This is one in the United Kingdom, and this brought together 2 hospitals and 3 research groups. And these people met at the kickoff meeting. They didn't know each other. They were very skeptical of the whole idea. There had been several false starts to build a building for them, and so the first part of it, as is always the case, dealt with trying to get some kind of organization together there. And so we used our metrics to determine how much support space. And the building has support space on the outside because it's sandwiched between 2 other old buildings. One of the first things I learned in the United Kingdom was when they say the new building next door, they mean a building that's like 500 years old. So we were squeezed between buildings, and so the building is inwardly directed and has animal facilities on every floor connected by an elevator. So that was our way at that time of solving the dichotomy between what the researchers wanted and what the health, safety, and welfare people wanted. And so one of the first modern lab buildings in the United Kingdom, we went on to do 16 more projects there.
Was that the first project where you were able to get manifolded fume hoods? I think that's like a great story. that you were able to go over there and show them why there's a benefit and why manifolding is actually better and more beneficial.
Well, they weren't used to it.
Right.
And they weren't used to the U.S. version of piping hot and cold air around the building. They pipe hot and cold water and translate it into hot air and cold air locally, which is an okay scheme for some kinds of buildings. Anyway, we did do a lot of convincing over there, and it was a great project. Traditional laboratory casework. This is a case where the architect worked hand in hand with us and had a great deal to do with the casework and the way things looked and operated. They got interested in it, and it was a great teamwork. So later, the Scripps Research Institute wanted to build a facility in Florida, and they wanted to do this because Jeb Bush got $500 million from his brother, who was the president at the time, to start a biotech center in Florida. And so they did that, and interestingly enough, Scripps was obligated contractually to hire faculty for this facility on a timeline, and the facility got delayed while they tried to decide where to put it. And there was kind of a two-day lag, so we did 2 other lab buildings at the University of South Florida for the Scripps people to occupy because they were going to be hired on a schedule that didn't match this construction. Well, again, we were able to use our metrics to get things pretty much right, and well, it was a great project. We had a good time. They built a robotic system of sorting drugs, and it's to the left of this casework that you see on the left. And the fun thing there was it was in one of the temporary buildings, and the robot setup cost more than the building. No, that was fun. So anyway, we were able to do that. Then we went to Australia, and we hit some of the same problems with heating, ventilation.
Let's look at the roof of that building. So that was Lab of the Year in 2015, and if you look on the roof of it, you can see, a lot of stacks. We were able to push them to manifold 3 fume hoods together if they were in the same lab run by the same people. That was it. There was no manifolding. Now there is, but not in 2015.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time trying to convince them, and we finally realized it wasn't going to happen.
Right. What was hilarious is when we're touring the building, when it was all done, and we're up at the very top deck, which is kind of the penthouse where all the mechanical stuff is, there's 3 strobic fans up there. And I'm like, why are there strobic fans up here, but all of our fume hoods have their own thing? Oh, that was for the atrium exhaust.
Anyway, there are a lot of wonderful things about this building, and the one I like to look for something beyond doing a great job, trying to help the client do something beyond just a great building. And so in this case, this building is in Adelaide. Adelaide is like San Diego. It's not on the way to anywhere. It's at the end of the country, and so they were trying to attract research people to Adelaide to work in conjunction with a new hospital being built next door, and to bring biotechnology and research to Adelaide where they needed it. So that was a prime goal here. The other good thing about the project was that this client said, we want to all work in the same room. There won't be any private offices for anyone. And that is usually something we have to try to talk people into, so that was good. We started out on the right foot. So we did that. And Leslie personally chose these colors.
We never get to choose the colors. It's always some interior designer that chooses the colors. But we did design the bench. So that is a custom flexible bench system because they didn't have anything like that in Australia at the time. So we were able to design something that was highly flexible, and then they manufactured it right there in Adelaide and delivered it, and there it is. There's another innovation that Malcolm didn't talk about, that when you're going to a country where they haven't had too many outside lab planners involved, it's been mostly people that have worked within that same country. When you get to come in and show them what you've done in other countries and what the codes allow and push the envelope, previously they have what they call PC, primary containment, it's like BSL, biosafety levels. Every lab was supposed to have its own separate hand washing, gowning, and all that. And if I was going to go from one lab to the next one down the hall, I was going to have to take off my lab coat, take off my gloves, wash my hands on there. We were able to make it so that people could work on the same floor and not have to do that. And then we created a PC2 elevator or lift so that, again, they didn't have to degown and scrub and do all this stuff just to move product around or to move samples around. So that was right there, that's the bridge. That's the PC2 bridge. So, yeah.
I can't resist talking any longer, but I've been respectful of those who are significantly older than me. And so I want to go back to the very first thing that Malcolm said, which I find really provocative, and I hope you find it interesting. And he's right, that when you started to design, or when you got a commission to design a lab, you went to the casework manufacturer to assist you in designing the lab. And that is something you all should be very interested in, since that is what you do for a living. I've done labs across the world over 40 years, and just to take two as an example, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute was done with lab crafters, and the interior of those labs are totally the result of a collaboration between lab crafters and Raphael Vignoli architects. And Rockefeller University, which some of you visited, was done by Bicasa, and those interiors are totally a collaboration between Raphael Vignoli architects and a casework fabricator. So in a way, the world seems, in my mind anyway, to have come 360 degrees to where, and if you look at the photographs that Malcolm is showing you, those interiors are all the result of your expertise. I mean, there's a grid. There's nothing very magical or mystical about lab design. There's a grid, and you take the benchmarks and you distribute spaces according to those benchmarks. Again, Malcolm is going to probably shoot me, but that's when, as an architect, it comes down to something that simple. So I think where the profession is going, and in the last 15 years, this has been shown to be true, that with the use of building information management systems, Revit, there's one set of drawings, and they go from the designer to the casework manufacturer to the contractor for installation. And SEFA is kind of seamlessly behind that whole process. And then those drawings at the end, when the lab is finished, those same drawings go to the user of the lab to manage the resources. And as Malcolm also touched on, robotics are becoming increasingly important in scientific research or in healthcare. Pharmacies are all robotic, cage washing, vivariums are all robotic. It's within the next 10 years, laboratories will be totally reconfigured by robots and not by people, with the decreasing cost of computers and machinery, that will become likely that research is not even done by human beings in a lab anymore. All the researchers will be outside of the lab, and the research will be done in a totally safe environment with robots. Anyway, that's my speech. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're not interrupting. And I don't disagree with any of that. I actually heard Earl Walls give that same speech 25 years ago.
There you go. But I think it's really important for these folks to hear how important they are to the profession of science and design. And it's not a dichotomy, or there's not a split between the professions. We've got to bring this world together.
I just wanted, I don't disagree with anything you said. I just wanted to finish SAMRI.
Yep.
Their goal was to bring new research, and within 2 years, these people and their research teams had moved to Adelaide, and we're happily at work in the building, which was a good recruiting tool at that time. So I just felt that that building achieved something more than just being a great building. It got their goal and their financial cash flow situation going in Adelaide. So you can tell I'm a tech wizard. So that sort of ends what I had to say, which I think is a summary of how lab planning got to be a separate discipline. And, but it isn't the only way that labs get built. Some architects, like Jay, are very interested in the laboratories and want to participate fully in them. And I'm all for that too. We have all got plenty of work to do, so I don't have a problem with any of it.
The slides you showed from Lou Kahn I thought were interesting, and I have a little anecdote. I studied with Lou Kahn at UPenn after he had done Richards and just before he died, and after he had done Salk. But Richards was a architectural icon, but a very, very bad lab. And everybody hated it, and the labs were overheated, they were crowded, they were cramped. The problem with Richards is it was conceived of as these towers in a park, and they were very small floor plates with very few researchers on each floor, so there was no collaboration, there was no way for a lab to expand or contract, there was no way for the building to be flexible. And it was and still is a total disaster as a lab, even though it's taught in every architectural school across the country inappropriately. If you look at Salk, there's two lessons from Salk. Salk is all horizontal. In fact, Salk Institute started as a much taller building, and Jonas Salk made Kahn lower it and make these horizontal floors, which is a lesson that our firm has carried on. Labs should be horizontal. You should be able to expand and contract laterally. You should be able to collaborate. You should be able to hear what's happening in the next lab. You should walk by somebody's bench, not go up and down in an elevator, but traverse a corridor. So it's interesting that he learned from his mistakes. The other lesson there is that in my experience, good buildings always have very, very dictatorial, determined owners. So at Howard Hughes, Bob McGee was extremely fascistic about who could be in that lab and how it was supposed to be designed. And if you didn't like the way the lab was laid out, he would tell you, don't come to Genelia Farms. We just don't want you. If you don't want to collaborate in a horizontal lab, we don't want you. And to go back to something Josh had mentioned and Malcolm brought up as well, at Rockefeller University, the write-up stations are completely removed from the benches. They're on the other side of a corridor. They're very flexible. I think researchers spend much more than 40% of their day at the computer now. So now you're sitting in an area where you're surrounded by your cohorts at a window with a view across the river in a very flexible space where you can eat and drink, and all the research is happening on the other side of the corridor. That was something that the researchers at Rockefeller University didn't like. And Rick Lifton, who's the president of Rockefeller University, who had the final say on who entered the lab, if you wanted to have your write-up desk at your bench, you were not allowed to come into the lab. He just would not let that be. So he maintained the purity of the vision, which is why everybody at Rockefeller wants to be in that building, not because of the architecture, but because of the determination of the leadership of the university.
Yes. That same thing happened at SAMRI. Same situation. We learned a lot of lessons there. One lesson we learned is that the architect and lab planner and engineers tend to go away towards the end of the job. I mean, we move on to the next project, and the university is left with people that were participants, except they also start to move around. And in that case, we started getting phone calls from the university saying, can you do a drawing for us? We want to turn these lab benches sideways and put the refrigerator at the end of the bench and blah, 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 blah. And we said, what's going on here? And then we figured out that the people that worked on the concept and helped us design the building had gone away. And the people that were there helping the new research staff move in didn't understand the building. And I've always wanted to make a video of how to operate your building, but I haven't been able to find a client that wanted to fund that. But anyway, what we did was send Leslie back to Australia 3 or 4 times to show the faculty how to use the building. And after that, the request to modify the building to meet what the research staff had in their last building, that tapered off and they went ahead.
Isn't that a great task for SEFA, though? If they're writing a manual on SEFA installation, why don't they operate on how to manage and operate a SEFA-specified building? You could write an operating manual and continue to expand. Again, you guys are not just bending sheet metal. You really are controlling the future of research, and how that building gets managed. It's another SEFA standard that you could write into a spec so that when you turn over your Revit model to the owner at the end of the job to manage the building, he's given certain things that he can or cannot do as he manages a building. It'd be great.
Idea, and this group would certainly.
Exactly. They're the ones.
I know they would love to fund that.
Well,
no, it's a good idea.
What you said is really important, and it reminded me of a project that Malcolm and I worked on in Chapel Hill, the Genomic Sciences building there. Right. And a great lesson from a previous project told us that even though we had put DI water and power up high on a pipe drop so that they could add their water polishers, and this is a different project in a different location, somebody had gone into their lab and drilled into the DI system, completely contaminating it, ruining it, leaking it all over the building so that they could add a water polisher. And so for Genomic Sciences, we did like a little manual where we showed them, here's what's in your building and how to use it and why. And I think that might be the only project we actually did that, formal of a user manual for. But I think a user manual for a lab is actually a really helpful thing because, maybe a lab manager in a building knows that kind of thing, but maybe they don't. Malcolm, what was super interesting about what you were showing in sort of the timeline and evolution of lab design is when it started out and everything was very cellular, and we call those silos now, and everything was just a little repeated thing and people didn't talk to each other. Their office was probably inside their lab in the back, which we can't do now. And then the evolution now where things are more open. So we've gone from silos into neighborhoods where you don't want it too big. People want to see each other, talk to each other, and be related. But it's interesting to me that there are still institutions and places where they do still do silos. They're still building the walls. So when we talk about flexibility and adaptability, it means something different to everybody. So in your opinion, what is the thing that you've done over, the last 40 years of RFD that really pushed flexibility and adaptability? Is it a building? Is it a system? Like, what is it that you think? Because we're looking at the future now. Where are we going in the rocket age?
Well, I'm not quite that smart to know where we're going. But the thing that to me is always important in every lab building is that the building be laid out with modular planning in your mind and as a tool. And I absolutely thought that after 40 years everyone would know this. But remember, there's a new batch of clients and a new batch of architects and engineers every year, and they aren't necessarily taught these things in school. So getting the building, and especially the building structure, organized in a modular system so that things can be moved later without harming the building, the room next door. I did want to go back to one thing that during our early learning process, when we were learning what things needed to happen in a cellular biology-oriented laboratory, so were the researchers. And when we got that Hybrid building down the street finished, we got a phone call one day, and the PhD lab supervisor said, these millipore water polisher things that we bought, they don't seem to work. And we said, well, it's not exactly on our bailiwick, but we'll come out and see what's going on. So we went out and we looked at it and we said, well, it's not plugged in. And they said, oh, but we plug it in when we're going to use it. Well, if you know how they work, that doesn't work. It has to circulate the water all the time in order to run through the filters to make the water sterile, and they didn't understand that. And so it was a fun time because everybody was groping for the future, and it changed everything. No longer did we have to have huge central shafts. We could distribute air and pipe services horizontally, and that was an exciting time.
So where lab planning is going is very much a result of Malcolm Barksdale's career, and he's one of these legacy minds that comes along once in every generation or so, and made the design of laboratories into a profession that had an institutional memory, which he mentioned, the benchmarking process. And the advantage of that is that in today's world, you don't know who you're designing a lab for. You never have you don't know the researcher that's going to be moving in 3 minutes after the building gets its certificate of occupancy. But his benchmarking gives you this institutional memory, which is actually much smarter than what any one researcher would want to have in their lab, because it cuts across countries, it cuts across regions of the United States, it cuts across types of research. So you cannot overemphasize the importance of this benchmarking process of, I don't know how many years you've been doing this, it's a long time, but what you've given to the profession and for the people in this room is a foundation to move into the future. And I just want to thank you for doing that. From the way you look, it hasn't been easy on you to do this.
Well, we have the process pretty much.
You have it nailed.
Organized. The process of gathering and recording that information is pretty straightforward in our office. And so,
but thank you.
The interesting thing is that you can go to I2SL and see they have database information. You can go to the trade line information and you find it there. The problem is that different people organized it all, so you're not exactly sure if you're comparing apples to apples. But our information is every project that we did is in the database, and the same half dozen people did the takeoffs and did the arithmetic, and so we know it's right or wrong, it's consistent from project to project. So that's helpful.
So
I'll tell you a Bob McGee story.
Great.
good.
We did the UCSD building out here with Bob, and it was a great guy. And of course, we were young and we thought we knew everything about lab planning. And Bob is pretty much determined. One of his favorite phrases is, that wouldn't be helpful. Yeah, you remember that phrase? Anyway, on the first building we did together with him, we fought like cats and dogs, because I knew everything and I didn't think he knew anything. And anyway, we got through it, and then we did another job together, a second one. I thought, well, he's got some good points here and there. Maybe I ought to relax about some of them. And so took some leadership from him. We got along pretty good, And the third one, I sort of said, maybe my job is to implement what the client wants. And we've been good friends for 25 years after that. So there's a lesson there for all of us.
That's great.
The downside that I see now is the architects don't get to meet the owner of the building, right, the client. In between us and the dean of the school is the staff of the university, is some group representing the faculty. Often there's a project management group that wants to manage and basically tell us how to write reports about the things we're doing. And so we don't really get to meet the guy with the vision. And that's harmful, I think, to our industry.
No, the
And
project
to
management
architecture
team.
and to the owners.
The project management teams that insert themselves between the client and the architect are the scourge of the industry. They are the worst because
Yes.
they don't contribute anything and they just cause confusion.
Yeah. one of my good buddy architects call him the project sniper. The truth there. So, you know, it's hard, that part's harder. It's actually harder to do a building now than 25 years ago.
Right. Well, but architects also have been relinquishing responsibilities since
Yes.
Henry Hobson Richardson was the clerk of the works at Trinity Church. He was on site with his architects monitoring the construction of that building. Now we like to hand off the construction administration to a construction manager. Again, totally wrong. There should be a continuous involvement of all parties through all process.
And there's so many voices at any project table. There's so many specialties that, you know, if you look at the list of who was involved in a project 30 years ago,
Right.
it's going to be triple or quadruple that now.
Yeah.
It makes it more complicated to coordinate and to get things right in the end.
Yes, and because our work finishes late, the casework is, you know, towards the end of the project, and most of the rest of the team has moved on. When we're there, we get to hear a lot of the troubles that are going on, and almost all of them are because the people that started the job aren't there in the end. And that's a shame, and I don't have an answer about how to fix it, but I think architects were very short-sighted when they, years ago, in order to keep their insurance cost in line,
Exactly right.
gave away supervising the jobs. That was a major mistake.
Big mistake.
And
With you.
yeah, we all suffer from that one. The only thing the AIA has ever done that I thought was really good was they recently got the federal government to agree to a higher fee rate schedule going forward. So we'll give them that one thing they got done.
There you go.
So Malcolm and Jay, over the decades that all of us have been involved in projects, you've worked all over the world. You've worked all over the world. Has there ever been, I always go back to things that I've seen in other countries that just totally shock the heck out of me. I mean, we've seen things. Malcolm and I did a tour of St. Andrews University. Remember that?
Yep.
And we're touring their existing old chemistry building. And I'm saying this because I think the building's torn down now, I hope. We go into this gigantic chemistry teaching lab, and it's on the North Sea. It's right where all the wind is blowing and the golf course is. It's right near the golf course. And there's fume hoods on both sides of the room. And those fume hoods consisted of a double hung window with a box around it and a tile countertop. And there were dozens and dozens of them lining the room. The problem is they're not hooked up to any kind of mechanical system. There's another double hung window on the outside of the wall. And so if you want to do chemistry work, you open up that window and you open up your double hung window sash that you're working from. And the problem is, you can see it, you're on the North Sea. The wind is blowing constantly. So I think maybe they had so many fume hoods so that you could go on the side where it might actually suck instead of blow into the room. But we'd see things that just totally shocked us, surprised us, and amazed us. What's a memory that you have of something that just blew you away in either a good or a crazy way?
Well, that one was good. And the other one I liked was the British tendency to exhaust fume hoods through the window glass with,
Right down the
with those
sidewalk.
little fans, pancake fan, just bolted, you know, I guess glued to the window. And they just exhausted the fume hoods out into the patio, in the courtyard.
Or right down on the sidewalk on the public walkway.
Another one, you know, that we learned when talking to people, when all of us in the industry were talking, at University of California, Berkeley, we remodeled an old building there, and we asked all the researchers and about vibration. Is vibration an issue for you? No, vibration wasn't an issue. We thought that was kind of strange, but it was an old building, poured in place concrete, and so we said, well, maybe it's just sturdy enough, you know, by accident. And then the electrical engineers came back and said, you know, we don't know why, but in the evening between, say, 10 o'clock and 4 in the morning, electrical use spikes, and the building is obviously being used at that time. So we went back and asked them again, well, why are you using the building in the middle of the night? And they said, oh, vibration's less. So you have to persist and make sure you're asking the right question, because you don't, the people that are helping you build a building may never build another building, may never have been involved before. So you have to recognize you can't ask them what the answer is. You have to try to get from them what the issue is.
Jay, how about you? What have you seen that was either awesome or shocking?
I don't have anything to match that. I always find those, going into those old labs very interesting. And the example you gave of this rudimentary fume hood is kind of the definition of a fume hood. And I find it remarkably poetic that it would work that way. And it certainly is carbon neutral, low energy and consumption. I mean, it's a fantastic, now maybe there's a clue there for somebody to take that very primitive fume hood and develop it into something with, you know, wind power or something, I don't know.
You have to put a windsock in the lab.
There
so
you go.
Know which way the
There you
wind
know
is
which
blowing.
side of the fume hood to be on. But those things, I love going into old labs. I mean, I find them very inspiring, you know.
I have a slide that I could not find, but when we started going into some of these hurriedly built labs and labs that were incredibly overused, you know, when chemistry labs would have 5-gallon buckets of terribly hazardous materials just sitting around, left over basically from the war. And I have a great photo that I can't find of a fume hood at UCLA where all of the electrical sockets are black and sooted around where they shorted out over the years. I've got to find that slide. But that's the kind of thing we saw in these labs that were built in a hurry and used in a hurry. We did win the war. That was good.
So have you done anything on a project somewhere that you think this was my swan song? This is the best thing I ever did? Because people always ask that. What's your favorite project? It's like asking what's your favorite kid.
But
And I
everybody
think
answers that question the same way. They don't
The
call
next
it,
one.
they
They
don't
say
call
the
it,
next one.
exactly. They don't call it, you practice architecture.
That's
You
correct.
never really get it.
That's
You know,
right.
even, you know, when I get to be as old as Malcolm, I'll still be practicing. I'll never get the tune down. I'll
Yeah.
always be rehearsing.
But
Because there's the next one. There's another
always the
client.
next
There's
one.
another
But-
challenge from a lab planner.
What's something that you've done on one of your lab projects that you just say, man, that was so great that I was able to do that? And you can't
I'll tell
do
you
it
what
on
it
every
is.
project.
Rockefeller University, when you look at it from the campus side, you don't see any building. I therefore think it's the best building we ever did because it is totally invisible from the university side. No facade, no entry.
Well, it's brilliant and groundbreaking in so many different ways. You know, the construction and the method and all of that. But that's really
But if the buildings can
intriguing.
disappear into the community that they're in, then that says something about the sensitivity to the environment.
yeah.
Just a thought.
Malcolm, how about you? What have you done that you just look and say, man, that was one of the best things I ever got to work on or do, or an idea that you had that?
Well, I liked the project in the UK. We brought them, well, Ian Caldwell, the director of estates, that's campus architect to us Americans, gave a talk once with me, and he gave RFD credit for bringing modern laboratories to the UK.
Yeah.
And we, you know, okay, I hate to be immodest, but we did do that. And then the UK architects got it figured out, and they've been carrying on. But we made a huge difference there because those people, well, when we toured their existing labs, one woman told me that she absolutely wanted to have 2 windows in her lab. And I thought, well, that's pretty specific. I mean, you know, okay. And then we looked around and we realized that her lab, which was several hundred years old, had no ventilation. It didn't have any supply air, it didn't have any exhaust air, and it didn't have any way for cross ventilation. And she was just hoping to have a couple windows to open so that she could get some air moving through her lab.
But Malcolm, you're being too modest to say you brought lab planning to the UK. You brought lab planning to the world. You brought it to the United States. I mean, you are lab planning. There wouldn't be anything if it wasn't for you. It's not just the UK. Seriously, I mean, you're an institution.
Well,
That's why you're standing there and I'm sitting here. Thank you.
Does that mean you guys have said everything you want to say and we're done and we're going to open it up to questions? Well, I'm looking at it and it is actually the right time. So we would like to open this up. I'm sure people have got burning questions they'd like to ask these very esteemed gentlemen that are here with me. And so don't be shy and don't be afraid to make fun of us. Whatever you want. Go ahead. Don't make me call on you. I will call on somebody if you don't.
Call on Johnny Meyer.
I'll just ask not sort of a question, but you mentioned that it would be good for SEFA to work on the standard. I'd like for you to actually describe what the pieces of that might be. What would be the direction that would be something that SEFA would take on that would help you get to resolving some of those issues? So
Could every-
I'm challenging you to write the pieces.
Could everybody hear what Kurt was just asking? Okay, Kurt was saying that Jay thought that SEFA should get involved with writing a lab management and operational document, and would Jay write what that thesis is, and what does that mean, and what does that entail?
So I wish I could do that, but I have this incredible respect for what you guys do, and talking about institutional memory, that's what you people are really about. You create a standard which is really a projection into the future that avoids all the mistakes from the past. And that's what you guys are about, and that's why it's so important. Every time I go to one of your committee meetings, I'm just blown away by the level of commitment and the amount of detail. It's something beyond anything that I could do as a brain. But I wish I could do what you just said, but I think you guys are already very well equipped to carry on something like that because you do it so well. And I tell you, every architect depends on SEFA. I mean, if you can specify a SEFA standard in a spec, you know that you're going to get a good product. And that's been true for as long as I've been in the profession. So congratulations.
So, it seems to me that the idea of a standard is good. We ought to be able to make a video for a particular building, but maybe we could we, meaning you, could make one to tell people how to operate the building. For instance, it isn't so big now because we ought to have automatic sash closers and presence sensors and all kinds of direct digital control devices to manage energy in the labs. But it's important still for the faculty and the research people to understand what it means if they don't shut the lab sash. And we used to be, a smart aleck remark, but it's that each of the fume hoods should be connected to the administration department, and the cost of operating the hood should be deducted from the staff salaries. And then they would pay attention to shutting the sash. But that's a good lesson. People develop bad habits, and there are other things like not drilling holes in the high purity water system that I think, especially with big buildings, people would learn to use their building properly. And what we found out years ago was that up to some point, many scientists are good at reading the drawings because they're used to thinking abstractly. Their whole lives are spent talking about things we can't see. And so looking at drawings and diagrams through the microscope, they're used to it, but they don't always interpret it correctly. And of course, we have modern ways of showing it to them now. But still, they need to be taught how to use their building. And that'd be a good project.
I can't, the lights are so bright I can't see. Is there anybody else that's got any questions or comments or anything? Anything you want to hear us expound on?
Bert here. One more. Ron and I were just talking, and I think. Okay. Yeah, Ron and I were just talking about the request that was made about could you help start us out with that guideline. I would just like to say the contributions you're doing with each of our committees is vital, because we'll go down the wrong rabbit holes. And I think that's what Kurt is really talking about, is how can we make sure that what we build is going to serve the industry well. So whatever we do, let's make sure that they're involved.
We would love to be.
Okay, I just want to add a little bit more to the discussion on the Salk Institute. I've done lab planning for 35 plus years now, and recently took some people on a tour through the Salk, and it amazed me how that building planned, what's it now, 40, 50, 60 years ago, in fact, still holds up so well. And to me, the biggest strengths are three things. It's the horizontal layout, over and above the great architecture, obviously, the interstitial spaces, and the modularity. And that modularity obviously feeds back to the lab casework, etc. And one of the challenges I think we always have is to get clients these days, with all the divisions we talked about, the project managers, the developers, the people that insert themselves between the lab planners, architects, and the users, the most important part of the entire process, is to make them accept ideas like that in modern design, where it doesn't always pan out as the cheapest way to do it up front, but it is a better way to do it for the long-term success of the facility.
There's an interesting thing about the courtyard in the Salk Institute, that when Kahn was designing it, it was filled with trees and plants, and it was a garden. And he invited Luis Barragan, a Mexican architect, to come up and look at the drawings for the plaza, for the garden. And Barragan said, this is foolish. You should only pave, there should only be hard pavers in this courtyard, and you need one stream of water down the center. And that's exactly what Kahn did. He got to the time in his career where he really could listen to very profound advice. But that space is probably the most magical space in the United States, in my opinion.
And photographed.
Right.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about the Salk, if you have a chance to see it or if you have already seen it, they have one thing that was designed in and built in that they've kept as a historic relic, because it absolutely did not work. Do you know what I'm talking about? The sliding walls. So they had a system, a grid system in the ceiling where they could move these, they were like gigantic barn doors, to create lab support spaces or offices or whatever. And it became so difficult to move them and so cumbersome that over the years they never did, and they ended up taking them all out and going to gypboard and all that. But they do have one historic door there, like as a relic, to remind everyone that we did try and do this flexibility thing. It just wasn't done right, you know. How would you know that? It was the first time anyone tried it.
Yeah, they got a lot of things right.
Yeah.
Yep. Everybody probably wishes they could afford interstitial space. That was before there was a coastal commission also that would have limited, you know, height and other things, so.
Well, we really don't need it nowadays in many buildings.
Do I have anything else? Anybody else? Okay.
Okay.
I got one.
Okay.
Oh, great. Don?
So imagine yourselves in the future, 20 years from now, and you're faced with the problem of designing a new, academic research lab for a prestigious academic institution. How different do you think it would be from what we're doing today? What would the differences be?
You want to answer?
It's all yours.
You know, it's a very interesting question. I work with a lot of academic institutions, and they're asking that same question right now of themselves. And I'm working with some of the biggest thinkers on a new university that are trying to push themselves, 20 years into the future. And what does that space look like? So some of the classrooms there's no screens, everything's holograms. It's very different. But what hasn't changed? Hands-on learning, team-based learning. Those are things that are, there's just things you cannot learn. In fact, I think it was like Plato said it, you learn a thing by doing it. You're never going to learn it just by hearing about it, watching it, or whatever. You have to do the thing to actually figure out how to do it. I don't see that changing significantly. When I started designing labs about 30 years ago, I remember everybody was saying, animals, everybody's going to be using fewer and fewer animals, so vivarium design is going to go down. There's not going to be that much. I think it's way more now than ever before because it's gotten more specialized.
Yes.
And so I think the same is going to happen.
Same thing with instrumentation. We all thought that we would need, we all thought that we would need much less bench space because bench top equipment was going to get smaller and smaller, and pretty soon you'd be able to do all your work on your iPhone. But in reality, that didn't happen. What happened was they put more and more functions in a box about this big, right? They put more and more functions in it, and to me, the real driver is your hand controls the size of the tool in the end. Because if you're going to use your hand on your laptop, the laptop can't be this big. And so what we thought then didn't happen.
I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. It's going to be an exact continuation of what's been happening ever since Malcolm got involved in this, and that is research will be done less by people and more by machines, and there will be machine research spaces, and then there will be people sitting at terminals making those machines do the research. There won't be people pouring chemicals into beacons and mixing things and standing next to fume hoods. That'll all be done by robots. It's clear. And so there will be totally dark, machine-driven spaces, and then there will be light-filled spaces with people working in them with views across the Pacific Ocean and wonderful working environments, low carbon-neutral spaces, you know, recycled materials. All of that is what you guys are going to bring to the future, a more sustainable system of building workspaces. That's it. Horizontal, dark spaces for machines, sunlight suffused spaces for people.
So can you put a date on that for me? Because I have some stock I'd like to.
He asked the question, and I just volunteered an answer. I felt that it was due an answer.
Great. So is there anybody from the AIA that wants to defend themselves?
A scourge. AIA is...
We almost had a Jerry Springer moment there.
Yeah.
That's the first thing I was thinking about. Wow. Too bad somebody from the AA isn't here.
Malcolm was exactly right.
You know what Frank Lloyd Wright called them?
No.
The American Institution of Associations.
So
Another
it's
bureaucracy.
interesting how this is all kind of coming together today, because right after lunch, we're going to be giving the Salk Institute an award for the lab of the 20th century. Okay, so a gentleman from the Salk Institute will be here to accept that award. And is Diane Case here? Diane, maybe you could tee that up once that gentleman comes, because I know that you and I spoke about this, and that idea kind of, again, came from the advisory board, because that building was constructed or completed before the Lab of the Year competition started in 1967. So it never got a chance to compete for that award. So I think they do deserve that special recognition. We're going to do that right after lunch. Then at dinner tonight at 6:30, Don Shaw is going to present Malcolm Barksdale with the Lifetime Achievement Award from SEFA. Okay, and this is going to be what we call an open mic event. So after Don Shaw presents it, after Malcolm gives his brief remarks, anybody can get up and make a comment. You could call it a roast, you call it whatever you want. Hopefully there'll be some laughter, maybe some tears, but think about what you want to say about Malcolm and his accomplishments, and that'll take place at dinner time. Great. Thank you so much. So, as I mentioned this morning, the idea of honoring Malcolm Barksdale with a Lifetime Achievement Award really started back in January of this year. And, you know, it takes a number of meetings and lots of emails. Lloyd Fisk happened to be in Columbia, South Carolina one day, and I said, I'll meet you at Holt's Chop House, and we had an epic dinner at Holt's Chop House. And all of this started to come together from January on. And the whole idea of having the panel discussion, and since Malcolm, of course, is in this area of the world, and we really don't come out here, we come out here every 7 years or so. I thought that this was like the perfect opportunity to do this. So what I'm first going to do is I'm going to invite Don Shaw, formerly of ISEC, now a board member at Kiwani, and a friend of SEFA for 30 years, to come up and make a presentation and say a few words. Don, come on up.
Thank you, David. I first met Malcolm in 1981. As David mentioned, I worked for ISEC, and some of you may not know this, but Dana Dahlgren worked for ISEC for quite a long time. But Dana was our Southern California manager, and Dana called me and said, hey, when you're in California next week, I think we should go down to San Diego. There's a guy that's starting his own laboratory planning company, and I think he's got a chance of being successful. And he said, and I think you're going to like this guy. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. So, so I came over, and Dana and I drove down to San Diego, and it was a cold, rainy, late winter, early spring night, and we went to SPGA's office, architectural firm on Hotel Circle, and Dana and I got out of the car and went in and said to the receptionist, we're here to see Malcolm Barksdale. And she said, who? She said, we don't have anybody by that name. Dana said, yeah, you do. I've been here before. He's the guy that works way out in the back. And she goes, oh, that guy. She said, yeah, sure, go back, whatever you want. So we go back, and I meet Malcolm for the first time. And Malcolm, at the time, was lord and master of his own cubicle. Everything he could touch was in his realm. And we chat for a couple of minutes, and then Malcolm says, you know, let's get out of here. Let's go to George's on the Cove. And I said, I'm liking this guy. This is good. So we go, we have a nice dinner, and my relationship with Malcolm, like many good, valuable relationships, exists on many levels. And to me, Malcolm wears many hats. Malcolm's been a mentor, a teacher, a coach, an encourager. But probably the most important thing Malcolm's been to me is a very good friend for a very long time. Many of you may know that Malcolm and I share a love for cars, specifically sports cars. And Malcolm and I loved cars. Our relationship was a little different. I read magazines and dreamed, and Malcolm bought them and drove them. But he was kind to me and encouraged me. And Malcolm and I, as you may also know or may not know, is Malcolm and I have done many old car, vintage sports car rallies together. And there would be another hat that Malcolm wears is co-driver. And Malcolm and I have spent not just hours, but days together in cars that never dreamed of having radios. And we've talked about a lot of things under the sun. But one of the things we talked about was our businesses. And Malcolm told me, and this is the kind of stuff Malcolm won't tell you guys, so I'll tell you. But Malcolm told me that the reason that he named RFD, Research Facility Design, and not Barksdale and Associates, was because he wanted this company to be about the group, the team. He wanted to hire quality people. He wanted to teach them. He wanted to grow them. And as he said earlier today, he wanted to let them go and grow and learn and do their thing and give them the freedom to excel. He didn't want it to be just about him. He didn't have an ego that required his name on the masthead. And he told us today that RFD has had 160 some odd employees, and I think there's 20 some odd there today, which means there are a lot of very talented professionals that are alumni of RFD that are out in this laboratory world doing good work. And to me, that's the sign of a very good, very strong, very well-run organization. But the quality, the business quality that Malcolm exhibits that I value the most in my business life is leadership. And that's what it takes to build that kind of an organization. So, Malcolm, without further ado, we have an award for you that was properly spell-checked and vetted, unlike some others. So, Malcolm, please accept this award.
Thank you. All right. I just want to say that whoever in my office found all these old photos is in real trouble. All right. Nobody does this by themselves, and so I'm grateful to accept this award from SEFA, but I'm accepting it on behalf of everybody here at the front two tables from my office, even the two that abandoned us and left and retired after only 40 years. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. All of us owe a round of applause and thank you to Naomi. Without her encouragement, this wouldn't have happened. She was there even though I was reminded of this today. Don reminded me he's good at this. And he reminded me that at one point I was unemployed, and when I got down to my last $1,000, I ordered a case of champagne.
That's great, yeah. And the lesson is, if you're going to do it in style. Don't hold back. So as I mentioned before, this is an open mic Thursday night, and anybody is free to come up here and talk about Malcolm or actually whatever's on your mind. And so I'm going to leave the mic open. When you feel bold enough to get in front of 180 people, help yourself, okay? Great, and thank you again, Malcolm.
Good evening, everybody. I know many of you here, but for those of you that don't know me, I'm Rick Hines. I was Malcolm's longtime business partner and a VP at RFD until I retired, one of the people that abandoned, I guess, the end of last year, along with my friend Sean. Hearing Don Shaw talk, it sounds like he had a lot more fun with Malcolm than I got to. I was working while they were on their car rallies, but I first met Malcolm even before Don met Malcolm. In 1979, my first job out of architectural school, when I moved out to San Diego from the Midwest, we overlapped at the same firm for about a year, and then Malcolm joined Earl Walls Associates doing land planning for a few years, and then in early '84 founded RFD. We had kept in touch, and after he had more work than he could do on his own, I joined him. I have to thank Malcolm for taking a chance on a young, naive 28-year-old kid who had zero laboratory planning experience. In fact, hadn't been in a science lab since AP Physics my senior year of high school. So he must have seen something in me. We're still trying to figure out what that was, but it worked pretty well for 39 or 40 years. Keep in mind that way back then, a brand new firm, we didn't have much in the way of a technical library. And this was way before the internet, obviously. So we had to do outreach. And so people like Don, he mentioned Dana Dahlgren, Ron Sheets, who's here tonight, when he was a much younger rep for McIntyre Associates, then the Kewanee Scientific Dealer for Southern California. And Dana, as Don mentioned, was with ISAC. They brought us our first Kewanee and Hamilton catalogs to start our library. So I mention all of that to reinforce the fact that in spite of my lack of experience in those early years and our lack of an extensive product data library, RFD grew and was successful because of Malcolm's incredible work ethic, his remarkable marketing skills, and his patient training and mentoring of me and many other new team members that came along as RFD grew. He really set the standard for both the technical laboratory planning expertise as well as high-level strategic thinking for laboratory facility projects. So Malcolm, I want to forever grateful to you for the partnership, for the support, and especially for your friendship over these past 4 decades. You've been an incredible leader and incredible forward-thinking design professional that's made an immeasurable impact on the laboratory planning industry across the U.S. and around the world. So again, everybody, please join me in congratulating Malcolm for this well-deserved Lifetime Achievement Award. Thank you.
Since the open mic portion of the dinner is not getting a whole lot of action from the RFD people, I have a story to share with you, and it's not a Malcolm story, but it's an RFD story, and the two are very similar. In about 2010, I was fortunate enough to negotiate a casework contract with my alma mater, Westminster College in Salt Lake City, for all the laboratory casework with the president of the university that I had gotten to know. And what was really, and for all you people in the laboratory casework and supply business, this is kind of like a dream come true because I'm on this project before they've hired an architect, which is pretty heady stuff. So the president of the university asks me, what do you think we should do? And I said, you're building a laboratory building, your first one in 40 years. I think you should hire your laboratory planner before you hire an architect or a contractor and let them help you with this selection process. Okay, all right. So they said, well, we've already promised the job to another architect, but who do you recommend? And I said, I recommend RFD from San Diego. They're the people you should hire, and you should listen to them, and you will get an absolute first-class building. And they said, okay. So I get a message, and they said, good news, we hired RFD, we're going down the road, we're going to build a LEED platinum lab, which had not been done before, I don't think. And everything's great. And then I get a phone call, and this nice lady says, the president of the university said that RFD is going to be on campus next week working with the faculty, and they think you should be there. And I say to myself, what the heck do I have to add to this process? But it might be interesting. And I did just do this great deal, so okay, fine, I'll be there. So I show up in Salt Lake, and I am now a junior assistant RFD lab planner. And I am working with Rick to do lab planning. And I think this is going to be pretty cool. Never done this before. So Rick and I meet up, and we go up, and first day we meet with the groups then we have sessions with and you RFD guys, and many of you other lab architects know how this works. Then we have meetings with the individual professors. And I think this is going to be pretty cool. At times, it was the most staggeringly boring thing I've ever done. Rick is an absolute saint. This man has talents that I never even imagined. And Rick is listening, he's taking notes, he's talking to these people. And we get this geology professor. I don't know how we got a geology. We get the geology guy. And he says, I spend a lot of time thinking about how I organize my rocks. Whew. Then it goes on from large ones to small ones, et cetera, and he says, I've actually worked out a Dewey Decimal System for rock organization. Would you like to see it? And God, Rick, thank you. Rick says, no, we got another appointment. We're pretty busy, maybe at another time. I say to Rick, do you have any chewable cyanide tablets? And Rick says, nothing. He glares at me, and this is foreshadowing, and I think, that wasn't so funny. So then we go through the microbiologists, and we get to the end of the day, and we have one gentleman, and he said, guys, I got to tell you something. He said, I'm not the department head, but I'm pretty much the most important guy in the department. And he said, I interview all the pre-med students, and I need a bigger office. He said, I need an office that has a conference table, sofa, some chairs, and I can sit with the students, and I can chart out the path for these pre-med students, and that would really be important. And Rick, again, God bless him, he says, take it under advisement, I understand what you want to do. The guy says, and I've actually done some drawings for you and picked out furniture. Rick says, oh, this is great, thank you. And then the guy says, it's so great working with you. And he gets up, shakes our hands, he leaves. And he says, I say, Rick, so we're going to give this guy we're going to give this guy a bigger office? And Rick says, hell no. And I said, I'm getting it. I like this lab planning stuff. This is good. So the next day, and then Rick says, and again, I love this guy, he says, let's go get a glass of wine. So next day, we come back, and we start off by meeting with the whole chemistry department. The whole department, then they break into individual sessions and have like half-hour appointments and all this kind of stuff. And Rick and I start the day by introducing ourselves. I'm Rick Hines, RFD, I'm your lab planner. I'm Don Shaw, I'm a Westminster graduate. I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but it's great to be here. And then I say, I'm a Westminster graduate. I'm pretty much a businessman. I'm new at this lab planning thing, but I learned something yesterday that I wasn't aware of. I said, I didn't know that biologists need larger offices than chemists. And I'm telling you, all hell breaks loose. These people are going, bullshit, who the hell? And Rick is like oil on troubled waters. He calms these people down, slows them down, says, hey, Mr. Shaw, I don't know what the hell he's doing. And then they get up and they leave because they're not going to come back for their individual. And they leave and they're going, rah, 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 but they leave. And I have suddenly become fascinated with the artwork on the other side of the room that I didn't realize was that good. And I am locked on. And to my right, I hear, hey! And it's like, me? You talking to me? I look. And I have never seen Rick Hines mad before or since. I never want to see it again. And Rick is looking at me over these little reading glasses he's wearing. And architects believe in the power of the pen. Rick is pointing his pen at me, and he says, if you ever pull another stunt like that again, you are fired and you are out of here. So I go into full Enor, oh, gee, I'm so sorry, I'll never do that again. And I don't know why, but after 2 days, I've never been invited back to assist any RFD lab planners. And Rick, those were a really interesting 2 days, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. I wanted to come up and say a few words about working with Malcolm. I joined RFD almost 20 years ago. It'll be 20 years in April. And one of the things I want to communicate is the way that Malcolm and Rick and Sean had set up RFD is that it's really a place that has allowed lab planners like myself to flourish both professionally and personally in ways that many other firms really don't do. Within my first year of working at RFD, just as an example, I was sent off to interview for a project at Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Very grateful to Malcolm and Rick to have spent approximately 60 minutes training me on RFD's interview materials before I went off to this interview. A project that we won and that I spent several years working on. But that's a key example of the way that Malcolm set up RFD, which is it was never intended to be Malcolm as the only designer or Malcolm as the only person who could win projects. Malcolm set up the company as an umbrella organization for people such as Rick and Sean and Malcolm and John and Leslie and Terry and many, many others to be able to do their best work, to develop their expertise, to develop their voice in this industry, both across the country and around the world. And indeed, Malcolm's investment in our participation in SEFA has been a key part of that. And I'll thank, while I'm at it, I'll thank SEFA as an organization that's provided a platform for many of us to become players on a much wider stage than we would have otherwise. And Malcolm, again, has always invested in that from the very beginning. And frankly, this is something that is still a very important part of RFD as a company. Even people that we hire today, one of the things that is very appealing to them about coming to RFD is that they'll have the opportunity to go and become experts in this field, to go win their own work, which as a professional is one of the most gratifying things you can do. In many companies in our field, the sort of rainmaking activity, if you will, is very tightly held. People want to hold on to those reins because it's power, because it's influence, because in many cases people just want to control it for other reasons. But again, Malcolm was always very democratic about that. And indeed, that approach is something that I was able to really capitalize on. Malcolm encouraged me to go to whatever city I wanted to go to and meet with architects and talk with them and see if I could describe to them how RFD works, how we have a unique service offering, how our expertise is developed, and how that could contribute to their projects. I'm not sure if Don is still here from NEAD. Don might remember a couple of times back in the day when Malcolm and I came to New York City to try to sway you away from your wonderful table mate, Josh. Unsuccessfully for many, many years, but we're glad eventually we got an inroad. But again, Malcolm really encouraged us to do that, to go out and sort of develop the brand, sell the brand, tell the story, and develop our own voice in this industry. Thankfully for myself and for RFD, that included international opportunities. Malcolm always supported the idea of chasing projects in overseas locations for various reasons. But so I've been involved personally in pursuing projects in South Korea, Malaysia, Hong Kong, certainly Abu Dhabi, Dubai, England, many of which I've done. Of course, Leslie, similarly in Australia. And Malcolm was never afraid to make those investments. He never actually said, oh, how much is it going to cost for us to chase this project in England? He was like, hey, this is a prestigious project. It's a project that we should try to do. Let's just go for it. And we won many of those projects and took us to many places around the world. Malcolm was always very interested in joining on those international trips. I was very grateful to have Malcolm's company on projects that we did in India and in Abu Dhabi, in South Korea. One of Malcolm's best skills was to figure out where to go for dinner, which is extremely important every evening. So we would often find the most interesting restaurants in town. Of course, Malcolm had his favorites in London. My first experience eating quail was with Malcolm in London. We had our very adventurous sea bream dinner in South Korea, where every course of a 7-course meal was from sea bream. And many others in India and elsewhere. And indeed, that sort of, those were the opportunities where we really got to talk about things, talk about projects, talk about planning ideas, talk about the firm and where the firm was going. And it was really those opportunities that have developed our relationship, not only as colleagues, but also as friends. And for that, I'm eternally grateful to Malcolm for his support, both professionally and personally. So I'm going to raise a glass and say, Piers, Malcolm, thanks for everything, and congratulations on the recognition.
Hey everybody, before everybody starts getting up and leaving and going out to view the beautiful evening in La Jolla, I just had a couple of things that I wanted to say about Malcolm because he's had such a huge impact on my life and my career. And when I say my life, I mean my whole life, not just my work life. But I just had 3 points that I wanted to make, so this will be quick. One, after I started working with Malcolm, I had my first review, and it was with Malcolm and Rick and Sean, and they had notes, and they're talking to me, and they're giving me my review and what I needed to work on and all that. And Malcolm shows me his notes, and then he says it out loud. Leslie's a smartass, and I like that. So we were like that. Everybody knows that's true. The second thing that I really loved about Malcolm was the way he looked at what we did and how we did it. And I had been working on some lab projects previous to joining RFD, but I didn't know that much. But I thought I knew something, but I didn't really know that much. And so he taught me a very key thing, and that is you need to learn enough about what your scientists are doing to not sit there and ask them what they need. You need to lead them and guide them to what they need because you know what they do, so you guide them and help them. And he called the ones that would just sit there and say, okay, you want a drawer here, you want a sink there, whatever. He called that architectural stenographers. So I thought that was really a great thing, and that's guided my career ever since, is that I want to guide the conversation. I don't want somebody telling me I want a sink here and a drawer there. So that was 2 of my points I was going to make. The third point is he taught me how to enjoy traveling the world. Before I joined RFD, I had never, except for Canada and Mexico, like Baja, Mexico, and Vancouver, Canada, I had never left the country. I had hardly traveled outside of Montana, Washington, and California. My first projects with Malcolm were in the UK. And so, yeah, what Lloyd said is right. He always picked the most awesome restaurants. He always knew where to stay. It was always a joy traveling we went to England, Scotland, and Wales and had projects in all of those places. Then we started going to Australia a lot, and it was all over Australia. We also traveled to Taiwan. Remember that? We had a competition in Taiwan that was pretty amazing. We've got some great stories from that one. There might be other countries, plus all over America. Oh, Canada.
You can tell the story of our architect leader at dinner.
Okay. So we were part of a competition for a project in Taiwan. It was a CDC project. We were on 2 different teams. And so those 2 different teams were very different calibers. One was very design-oriented, and then they had a partner firm that was more technical-oriented, and we're the lab planner. And the other one, I think they did everything. And the group that did everything, because they were a great big huge firm, had a dinner in Taipei 101. So does everybody know Taipei 101? It's the one that looks like stacked Chinese takeout boxes, and it's the tallest building. It was the tallest building for a long time. We're way up high in this building, and we have this beautiful, lovely dinner, and they're serving, I can't remember the name of the Chinese kind of vodka that everybody drinks there, but all night long, they're just passing out shots of it, and you say, "Gambe," and then you have to toss it. So Malcolm and I, after a couple, we're like faking it and pretending we're drinking it, and we're not. But what Malcolm's referring to is the guy who's the head of the whole thing ended up getting carried out over somebody's shoulder at the end of the night because it was just too much, but he didn't seem to know that. Anyway, so many awesome and amazing experiences. Malcolm, I just can't thank you enough. I feel like so much of who I've been able to become is because of you believing in me and supporting everything. So thank you.